Good evening, and welcome to today's meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, the place where you're in the know. Find us on the internet at commonwealthclub.org or download our iPhone and Android app for program and schedule information and podcasts of past programs. I'm Dr. Ruth Shapiro, member of the Commonwealth Club's Board of Governors and your chair for tonight's program. And now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's program featuring John Lancaster, New Yorker contributor and author of the new book, How to Speak Money, What the Money People Say and What It Really Means. John will be in conversation with Michael Lewis, Vanity Fair contributing editor and author of books that include Flash Boys, Moneyball, and Liar's Poker. Let me just give you some more background about each of them. John is the author of the novels The Debt to Pleasure, Mr. Phillips, and Fragrant Harbor, and a memoir, Family Romance. He is a contributing editor at the London Review of Books, and his work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Observer, and the Daily Telegraph, among others. He has won numerous prizes, including the Whitbread and Hawthornden Awards. He was awarded the 2008 E.M. Foster Award by the American Academy of Arts and Letters. As someone who has lived in Hong Kong and in London, I can attest to his remarkable ability to capture the underlying sentiments and tensions in riveting stories of people and of place. His new novel, Capital, proves yet again his remarkable talent. It is no wonder that the Times of the UK wrote that Capital is brimming with perception, human empathy, and relish. He will be chatting tonight with Michael Lewis. Michael Lewis is an American nonfiction author and financial journalist. His work has covered decades of endemic global corruption since his debut work, Liar's Poker, currently commemorating its 25th anniversary, which transformed him from a disillusioned bond salesman to the best-selling literary icon he is today. On a personal note, I must take a few seconds to thank Mr. Lewis for helping me with some terrific family bonding. Over the summer, my family and I went on a road trip, during which we listened to his book, Boomerang, on tape. It is amazingly witty, insightful, and terrifying in terms of our ability to be in profound denial, and allowed my family and I to have wonderful dinnertime conversations. Thank you very much. You're about to experience an engaging dialogue between two distinguished authors whose work combines a sophisticated understanding of capital and the foibles of humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Lancaster and Michael Lewis.
Thank you very much. I'm Michael Lewis, and I'm in charge here. I was going to give you a bit of background on us, because I know John Lancaster from his writing, but we've also met each other on the other side of the Atlantic a couple of times in the last year. I'm on the front of his book. It says, How to Speak Money comes from one of the greatest explainers of the financial crisis and its aftermath. And unlike most blurbs, this is true and genuinely felt. It was actually written in a review of his novel, Capital. I first encountered John's work in the London Review of Books, to which I subscribe, and I was shocked at what came off the page. In fact, I was the idea that an Englishman was explaining to me how the American financial system had screwed up the world, I found so unlikely that I assumed he was a pseudonym. I didn't believe he existed at first, but then I dug, and we had mutual friends, and I found that this man actually existed, and I began to read all his books. And he's a really gifted writer. There are not many people I feel that way about who are alive anyway, and he's a real talent, and he's more a writer than writer about money. He's a writer who happens to have drifted into this subject and done wonderful things with it. His novel Capital is an example of that. It's the kind of, this isn't exactly a fair description, but it does a bit for London what Bonfire of the Vanities did for New York in 1987. And it actually attempts to describe the way money has overrun London in a way I've never seen anybody do. He wrote a book about the financial crisis called IOU, which was an excellent description of what happened. And his latest book, How to Speak Money, is a lexicon. It's a dictionary of financial terms that, well, let's talk to him. What's the purpose of the book?
I learned money and stuff from the outside, and it was a byproduct of writing Capital, as it turned out. I wanted to write about London today because it seemed to me that it was a city that had been completely reshaped by money. So when I grew up in Hong Kong, and when I first passed through London in the 70s, it seemed like an incredibly grey place. It seemed very provincial compared to Hong Kong, and just everything about it was grey. The buildings were grey, the people were grey, the sky was grey, the food was incredibly grey. In fact, the food had like a whole vocabulary of greyness on the plate, and no one could think that now. It's a city of immense diversity, energy, colour, vibrancy, with a sort of edge to it. And it seemed to me that it had changed on the order of magnitude of change you get after a kind of revolution or a war. I mean, it's really convulsive change. And I was thinking about the drivers of that, and it seemed to me that one of the main ones was to do with finance. That London vies with New York for being the capital of global finance. And so I started just learning more about it, realising that I was completely uninstructed in this very, very powerful force in modern life. And for me, the process of learning more about it started with this embarrassingly simple thing of literally not knowing what words meant. I'd be reading things in the paper, I would just literally not know what words meant to an, as I say, embarrassing extent.
Let's back up a little bit. Your father was a banker.
Yeah, of the old-fashioned sort. I mean, he worked for what was then a sleepy colonial institution called the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. I remember once looking it up, and at that point when he worked there, it was the 200th biggest bank in Asia. And of course it's now, global mega bank HSBC, which I think is the second or third biggest bank in the world.
Yeah.
It was very different kind of, it was like what they call 363 banking, where you take deposits at 3%, you lend money at 6%, and you're on the golf course by 3 p.m. And you don't accidentally blow up the world as a result.
And when you were a kid growing up, did you have any sense of what he did for a living?
No, not really. He didn't talk about it much. He didn't much like talking about money. But he would occasionally, like once or twice, we'd be sort of driving around somewhere and he'd point to, I remember once, in fact, it's one of the areas that's been on TV because it's quite near where the protests are, pointing to a thing, I think it was a shoe factory then, and saying that he'd given, when he was the local branch manager, he'd given the initial loan to sort of start the business. So I did have a sense. I think a lot of people feel put off this stuff in advance. They feel kind of pre-baffled, is the term I use in the book, that they'll never get their heads around it, they'll never be able to, they're defeated, that's it, it's over. But because, although my dad's kind of banking was very different, but because he worked in it and knew the people who ran the bank, and I remember him one day coming back from work and saying, I've forgotten who the head of it was at that point, but saying, so-and-so has just bought the British Bank of the Middle East. And so it gave me a sense that they were just people making decisions. So I felt I had sort of permission to understand it.
And when does this happen to you? When do you first start taking an interest in the world of money?
About 2005. I'd written a couple of pieces about companies because I got interested in the idea that there were untold stories in the world of business, that there was either a kind of go-go, boosterish kind of, as it were, business prose, and then there were anti-capitalist critics who thought, every single thing about everything to do with people making money was completely terrible. But there was a sort of gap in the middle. And so I'd done a couple of those and got more interested. And
when so let me stop you there, because one of the things, I mean, I don't know if you're unique in England, but close. In the combination of literary ability and willingness to try to help the reader understand things. And what I wonder is, when you first started doing this, your ambition was to write novels. Did you feel like you were slumming it?
No, I felt. I mean, I still think of that as my day job, but I think that Tom Wolfe said an interesting thing. He said that most novelists over the age of about 40 think that 90% of the interest of what they write is to do with the subject. When you're 25, you think it's all about your amazing sentences.
Yeah.
And then you gradually realise that actually it's about the world, it's about the